On this episode of Everything's a Primary Source, Jonathan All of the Rokeby Museum in Vermont returns to the podcast to walk us through an 1853 letter from his museum's archive that simultaneously tells us so little, but shows us so much. To celebrate the 250th anniversary of the United States, the Everything is a Primary Source podcast is taking to the road. This summer, I will travel from Chicago to Colorado Springs, recording place-based podcast episodes and collecting short oral histories from members of the public along the way. This is not a retrospective project. It is a living one, built on the idea that history is not only something we inherit, but something we actively create. Visit everything-history.com/America250 to see how you can get involved in this public history initiative. Welcome to the Everything is a Primary Source podcast, the show where we navigate history through popular culture. I'm your host, Eric Salmonson. I'm a social studies teacher, historian, and pop culture enthusiast. Each episode, I sit down with everyday people to discuss the media, objects, places, and events that shape us and reveal what they say about the past, as well as who we are now. The Everything is a Primary Source podcast is, therefore, your history, my history, our history through popular culture. I'm so glad to have Jonathan All here from the Rokeby Museum in Ferrisburg, Vermont. And this is not the first time we've talked. We met just a little while ago at the Vermont. They have an alliance for the social studies in Vermont. I'm more familiar with the Council for Social Studies, but they decided to go alliance route. And we had our booths right next to each other, and we were both chatting up what we do, and we found a lot of parallels and connections of what we're all about. And while we were at that conference, we talked about a piece of mail, a postcard, and it got us talking about all the ways that we can learn, just layers of things, ideas, facts, and make good claims about the past through things like correspondence. And so you're telling me about what we're going to talk about today, which was a letter that is a bit unusual for its time period. Do you mind telling us a little bit about what we're going to be chatting about?
Yes, I'd be glad to. I should first say that some context for my institution, Rokeby Museum, is the homestead of the Robinson family. They're a Vermont family that lived there for 4 generations, and we mostly focus on the family and what they did. And we do actually have quite a bit of correspondence. I believe the rough number is about 15,000 that we have in our archive, most of which we haven't even gotten a chance to look at.
Wow.
But to your point, the letter I brought today is one I've chosen from our collection for a very special reason. When you read correspondence, there's really any number of things you can pick out from it. Typically, people, when they write letters, they're communicating news of the family, noteworthy things, perhaps somebody's academic or business achievements, or news of their health is very popular. Some stuff for historians that historians find quite useful is also reactions to local or world events. These are all things that we as historians look for. But what's fascinating about the letter I've chosen is that it really doesn't tell you anything that would be of any interest to anyone not directly related to the family. There is quite literally no news in this letter. And that is exactly why it is actually, somewhat counterintuitively, incredibly valuable for us. Because it really does show a side that does not normally come through in correspondence.
So I imagined if we contextualize this further out, we're
Mhm.
talking 1853.
Yes.
And this letter that we're looking at is from whom to whom and why?
This letter is from our 3rd generation of the Robinson family. He is an adult, Rowland E. Robinson. He is writing to his mother, Rachael, who is out of the house. She is currently taken ill. She's spending time recovering at a relative's, and so he has taken upon him to write. He actually says in his first line that he has taken too much time to write, and he says, I fear that thee must have almost despaired of hearing anything from thy too neglectful son. And you already have quite a window there into the author and their connection. And if you're wondering about the thee and thy in 1853, the Robinsons were Quakers at this time.
Okay.
Rowland himself was raised as a Quaker. And for those who don't know, that is a religious group. And among the many things that they do is they adhere, or they did back then, to what was known as plain speech. And what that means is they do not use articles such as you. Instead, they use what are sort of more archaic terms such as thee and thy, which are considered, or at the time of Quakers' founding, was considered more casual and
Hmm.
more friendly.
So that's an interesting dynamic is that the Quakers, the Society of Friends, we usually think of as being, especially in that era, a bit progressive. They had views about women's role in society, and they were largely, I think there was earlier in that century kind of a order went out that any Quakers that owned slaves had to get, to set them free. And then Quakers by and large became abolitionists and very active in an Underground Railroad, especially. So to have it, not using modern, you have modernity in one side of who you are, but then sticking with old English style uh, terminology is just kind of interesting touch.
Well, you've actually stumbled, Eric, there on a very interesting sort of dynamic of Quakerism, which is sort of, as you said, those sort of two competing sides. I will say that one of the other sort of adherents of Quakerism was this idea they were against any sort of hierarchy in social status. That is why they use the term friend to refer to each other instead of Mr. and Mrs. Same exact thing with you. You going way back to older English traditions was sort of itself a bit of a hierarchical way to address somebody. That's why they're using the older, more neutral terms. And yes, Quakerism's branches of Quakerism's was also quite progressive, believing in nonviolence, women's rights, abolition. And as a group, you are correct that very early on they became opposed to enslavement. That's sort of how the Robinsons factor into a larger historical story as well.
I suppose this is just such a great like moment in time that's been frozen in this letter. And that whole era, I mean, mid 19th century, the entire 19th century is so often overlooked for its remarkable revolutions that took place. Just the entire century is a revolution. The beginning to the end of it are two different worlds that exist in so many different ways. And I feel like groups like the Quakers, which pre-exist the 19th century, but they were one of many that were constantly kind of testing themselves, like reacting to the changes going on. And like, how are we going to handle this change? How is this going to, work with us or against us? How do we adjust? And it seems like discipline was, temperance was kind of the rule of the day.
Mhm.
When you were describing this letter to me a few weeks ago, all I could think of was the orchard house in Concord with Louisa May Alcott's home. And because I've been there a few times and I've seen all the Little Women movies. And so I have this like image of a 1850s, 1860s, I guess is when that story takes place, parlor scene with, they weren't Quakers, but the Transcendentalists do share a few of the same kind of qualities, and they were temperance people, and they were reacting to what they saw, rightfully, as this wave of modernity that was going on in the 19th century. It's like, which of this stuff do we like and which don't we we don't like? How does this, challenge our belief system, our social structures? How does it conform to them, or how do we, behave ourselves or not in accordance with that? So, um, I what makes this particular letter so unique when it comes to um, most correspondence? Like you said that, usually it's like check-ins on health and reactions to world events or local events and gossip, maybe. But this one is like descriptive, right?
Yes, I'm glad you brought that up. Because it's funny, we were just talking about Quakerisms and the sort of big, massive social movements of the mid 1800s, and those are the things that pop up in the letters quite a bit. But this is a letter from a son to his mother who's away from home. And what is so unique about it, and is kind of funny, a lot of times when you read correspondence, you find many people did not quite like writing letters, or at the very least, they found it quite difficult. They would talk in their letter directly about not having the time, not having enough to fill the page, sort of rambling. And here, Rowland actually says that, quote, all the letter writing portion of the family have written during the past week, and most likely informed thee of everything noteworthy which had transpired for some time previous. So, right at the beginning, Rowland sets out, I haven't written for a while, and because of that, I'm afraid I can't think of a single thing to tell you.
Hmm.
And he sort of dithers on a bit. He, talks about how they miss her. He talks about how he's enclosed a sketch in the letter. He was an artist as well of the home for her. And moving along, he comes to this idea that he believes since he can't give her anything of news with the family, or any news with the community, or any news even with sort of national situations, he instead decides to, well, I'll let him speak for a moment. Quote, sometimes, I doubt not very often, thou sayest to thyself, how does it look then? And what are they all doing today, I wonder? I can gratify thy wish today, dear mother. And so he goes on to simply describe what the family is doing, not what they're planning to do, not anything big, but simply what every member of the family is doing at that exact moment that he is writing this letter. And what's remarkable to me about this, what makes it unique, is that this is, I think, objectively not a very interesting letter in the moment. I think if anybody were to take this, especially if you were not a friend of the family and were to read it, you would really gain nothing of interest from it. But what makes it fascinating to us today isn't just that I am a historian that is interested in the Robinsons and their lives. It is that this letter is recording something that most people don't bother to record, which is what do you do when there is nothing to do?
Right.
How are they choosing to spend their leisure time when, there's no motive really to do anything of note? And it's funny because as a result, like, obviously, yes, we know how people in the past spent their leisure time. We know generally what the pastimes were. Reading, writing letters is one of them. Get card games are very old. There are things that are sort of universal. But here we have not just relaxing, but just a clear sense of people that have nothing that they need to do and are thus choosing to do nothing. And that's something I think that we might not think about too often. And so that's sort of what's interesting to me. He just opens a window into the life of the Robinsons at this exact slice of time on this exact day.
Before we get some of those descriptions, can you remind me what time of year this letter was written?
I can. So this was written on September 18th of 1853. So it's fall.
Yeah.
I should also mention, I think I might have said that Rokeby is not only the homestead, but it's the farm as well. So these are farmers. And he also says up top that it is what they call first day. Again, Quakers have different words for days of the week, and that again goes back to sort of rejecting modernity. They chose to simply name each day of the week by a number. And so first day is Sunday. It is the day of rest for them. And so these are farmers who, they get up early and they work every day. And this is the one day that they really have to sort of put their feet up. And so makes it a perfect opportunity for him to sort of paint this picture for us.
And I'm glad that you ended with that painting of the picture because I'm thinking this whole time, I mean, the fine arts, or even not even, it's folk art sometimes, just drawings and stuff, are always the companion to letters. And I think about 1850s, 40s, 50s, we're talking market revolution era, like I said, where the home is becoming increasingly a place of just this. It's an escape from work. It's not meant to be the workplace at the same time. And so we get a lot of artwork from that era, both from trained artists as well as just people on their own, depicting kind of people sitting in their homes, and you might see a woman who is, um, knitting, or somebody enjoying having their food on their table or something like that, or a child on the lap of somebody reading a book together. And it's like, and people would use that as decoration. I still see it as decorations. I mean, there's plenty of versions of that, like that, kind of like Americana, um, what do they call it? Primitive art that you can find at craft stores and stuff, where they depict a very simple looking household from middle 19th century, and people are just like sitting at a table staring at each other, or it's like they're trying to get this idea across of the home is not just where you end up to go to sleep and have a few meals, but it's a place to spend time. And
Right.
and the fact that he misses his mother means that she was a figure in that equation on a first day, uh, so that during the day of rest, and that she was probably, if she had been there, was doing something, and she probably really appreciated getting that kind of information too, so that she could imagine everybody in their own mind doing these things.
Yeah, and I think also if we're talking about sort of the changing moods of the time period, this is also where we're starting to get, as you were saying, people thinking differently also about the family and the home, the sort of beginnings of that cult of domesticity that, was very popular in Victorian times. This idea of, home being, as you were saying, a place to rest, a very private, intimate space, really strengthening the ties of family. Because, of course, all of this was important beforehand, but you also have to consider how much time of people's lives before this was really spent on, uh, you know, sustaining their lifestyle, and whether that, working, kind of, surviving in some way. And I should also mention, as you may have guessed, the Robinsons were also in a higher social status at this time. They had some money. So even though they were farmers and they were working the land, they also had quite a bit of money. They were able to build an addition onto their house. And as you'll see, as I get into reading this letter, there are quite a few rooms. People are sort of spread out. In most, I think, typical homes at this time in Vermont, everyone would probably have been in the same room, possibly, working around one central space. But you'll see he is actually, Rowland in the letter, names several different rooms. And there's sort of a bit of personality, not just to the figures of the family, but even the rooms that they're in. Kind of the
Hmm.
rooms that they are in, they are sort of lending a certain personality as well.
I love it. I can't wait. So this is, I said at the top, and I'll say it again. This is a little bit different than usual. Normally, when on these podcasts, we'll take a piece of popular culture. And I think letter writing for the 19th century is the pop culture of that era, at least part of it. But normally it's like a movie or a TV show or a well-known book or something like that, in which both of us have quite a bit of insight on it. So this is a little bit different because you are the one who has the letter. I haven't seen it. So what we're going to do is I'm going to take the question. from my list of questions, this one fits perfectly into it. What behaviors and ideas are conveyed with this? Because that's exactly what he's doing, is conveying the behaviors of his household to the mother. And I think with each one of these, we'll use the elements of it as a way to say, what does this tell us about the last decade before the Civil War, that right in that middle part of the 19th century. What can this help us with? So, why don't you go ahead and we'll take it excerpt by excerpt.
Yes, I was actually thinking of how to do this. So what I've done is I've sort of split the letter into pieces. It was 2.5 pages. We won't read the whole thing, but I've got one that mainly focuses sort of on primarily on the family figures and what they're doing, and then the second excerpt has quite a bit of physical description of possessions, which I think is very interesting. So I'll start with sort of what the family's doing. And also, I should say as well, Rowland, like many people in his time, handwriting was not the best. So there are some words that are a little illegible to us. I think I only left one or two in. So if I stumble on a word or I have to say something, that just means that there is a question mark in place of that in our transcript. So,
Oh, Rowland, he could have worked on his handwriting better for us.
all right. So let me just jump into it for you today. All right. So, quote, this is first day and nothing doing in the way of work. It is very quiet, no noise more than the sighing of the wind, the singing of the hen, for I suppose it passes for singing among them and must be called so, and Rowley's prattle as he crawls about the house, inside and out, asking all manner of unanswerable questions. In the south room lies dear father on the setter, fast asleep with the last telebum just falling to the floor from his relaxing fingers. By the southwest window is George in a lazy chair, with one leg thrown over an arm of it, a pipe in his mouth, a book in his hand, and one of his hats stuck on his head very far forward. The room don't look tidier than normal, for Rowley's blocks are scattered about the floor, and there are plenty of pipes lying in the windows and on the stove. Naomi and Eliza are bustling about in the kitchen, intent on getting supper ready. The cats have retreated to the shelter of the meal chest and set up their backs and swelled at their tails at Di, who has come in to examine the chance of getting an early supper. Di has grown very handsome this summer. And I'll end the quote there on our first excerpt. So you have a
Wow.
smattering of family members and behaviors, and a couple little hints too about sort of how this family likes to spend its free time.
I love it. I feel like in movies and television in recent years, especially period dramas and such, there's an emphasis on realism, that they really want to depict people as relatable to the modern person rather than without losing the actual accuracy, while and making the people that they're showing seem more animated than what we would get in a portrait or something. And what you just described would be like I'm almost picturing a great director reading something like this before writing or design, setting up a scene, because we usually think of people in any time before, I don't know, the 1950s as being proper and
Mhm.
always, and here we have a man sleeping on a setter on some kind of furniture, like a couch type thing. And then is it his brother, that the writer's brother, that
Yes, the writer's brother, who George Robinson, at this time, he is as the eldest son, he is like the second hand of the father and running the farm. And you can see he is also, yeah, I think I know what you're going to mention, which is the very unique position he's in. I
yeah,
think one that's very recognizable to the modern listener. He's sitting in a lazy
yeah,
chair. And I would say some people, I think, would probably not think that a lazy chair existed in 1853, perhaps,
right,
but he's in the lazy chair. He's got a pipe in his mouth, a book in his hand. He's got a hat stuck far forward in his head, and he's got a leg thrown over the arm of it. He's sitting
yeah.
sideways in the chair, like a very, as you said, improper, what feels to us maybe like a very modern kind of sitting.
Yeah. I mean, we are using either devices or even just reading books or anything like that. Your your brain doesn't really mind if your legs and arms end up in these weird contortions because all it is you're looking for comfort. You're looking for a way that you can be focused on whatever it is you're looking at and not care exactly how you. And so sometimes if you see somebody like deeply engrossed in a book or something like that, you're like, why are you laying upside down on this couch with your, like, oh, with a pillow under your head or something like, oh, it just was comfortable. And so that's why I'm picturing this guy. It's like he is. I mean, that's it's such an incredible like moment in time frozen for us and demonstrates that they were real people. And this was, and it also says something about literacy, that this guy could read. And that's such a, I mean, you see it in signage everywhere in every library of like, reading is your gateway to the world. And it's right. I shouldn't say it in a farcical way, but like that's being demonstrated here that he has learned to read and is reading for enjoyment, not just for getting by in life.
Right. Well, very true. Yes, because as a Quaker, they would have absolutely educated their children. And as the eldest son who needs to take on the family business, George obviously would need to be literate himself. But yes, as you point out, they are also reading for pleasure, which is one of, again, those sort of universal pastimes and quite popular. I think something that is interesting to point out as well, because we were sort of talking about, you had asked earlier what time the letter was written. And we can also sort of suss out from what's being said here what time of day it's being written, even because he's said to us that Naomi and Eliza, who were actually servants hired by the Robinsons, are bustling about in the kitchen, intent on getting supper ready. So supper would have been what we today would have called dinner, the third meal of the day. And we can't obviously nail down the exact time they would have served that. But I think we can sort of get from the fact that, two adults are falling asleep, that this is probably at the very least late afternoon,
Yeah.
and everyone is sort of just in a state of true relaxation. There, the day is winding down, and everyone is just all they're waiting for is the dinner bell, really.
Want to bring history to life in your classroom? With everything as a primary source to go, you can borrow real historical artifacts from the last 200 years, shipped right to your school. It's hands-on history, paired with ready-to-use lesson plans and classroom activities that make the past come to life for you and your students. Whether you're teaching the Industrial Revolution all the way up through the Communication Revolution, there's something in our collection for every era. Visit everything-history.com/EPS to go and start transforming your teaching today. That's everything-history.com/EPS to go, because history belongs in your hands.
It's also very modern of them because having a day of rest was something that the modern times didn't didn't return to working people until the end of that century. And I know Sundays have what we would call Sunday, they call first day, but there is some sanctimonious, it is a sanct I don't want to say sanctimonious, it sounds bad, but it is a important day. And normally you don't have any kind of work except for the servants, obviously. But um the people in the factories, people in the mills, the people that worked in the railroads and things like that, all the live long day always had to, that it was scrape by to get that kind of leisure time for themselves. And they weren't really able to secure it into the 20th century in some cases. And here are these Quakers who are already enjoying it in 1853, that they have, if this was 150 years later, they'd be watching football probably, right? On
Yes,
September
I would say
18th, it'd
so.
be like week number two or something, and they would be um, engrossed in that. And everything else that you're describing could honestly be in any other time. I mean, I love also that there's cats that are mentioned,
Yes.
and that shines a light on something that is also often overlooked is the domesticated animals in your home. And if, especially a cat, I think in any time period, I know right now our cat is doing its job finding mice and protecting the house from them. And I assume that's one of the reasons that people would have a cat back then. But cats being considered kind of part of the family, having names and, hoping to get their dinner early and things like that or their supper early it's another clue in on society of the time.
Right. I should also note as well, which I think is kind of goes back to this being a bit of an unusual letter, is that I should mention Rowland Robinson. I said he was an artist. He was also an author, or rather, I should say he was destined to be an author. He did not start writing published works until much about 20 or so years after this letter is written, but you sort of already see his skill at it because he's writing this to not only inform his mother, but clearly to entertain her a bit. And there's a real color to the way he's describing the world. And I love that you brought up the cats because you are right. Again, sort of, there is a real mixing here of both practical and sentimental value of these animals. The cats on a farmhouse, absolutely important for managing rodents and the like. And yet at the same time, we're seeing, a real personality being ascribed to them because he's not just describing the cats, milling about the kitchen, but they've retreated to the shelter of the meal chest, so they're hiding, and they've set up their backs and swelled out their tails, so you can hear them almost hissing at die. And that really that combined with the line that Die has grown very handsome tells us this is not a person, but another animal. And so that I believe is quite obviously the family dog. They owned quite a few
Hmm.
dogs. And again, dogs, another perfect example. Practical, especially for a family like the Robinsons who do hunt, and yet at the same time, clearly a deep affection for them as well. And you have that sort of classic dichotomy of the cats and the dogs. The
You
cats,
you can
yeah.
Yeah, you can see the direction that this is going. That I don't know if it's exactly right on point, but I think the woman responsible for creating the Humane Society or the animal protection organizations in the later part of the century may have had some kind of Quaker upbringing or something. Maybe I'm off on that, but it just seems like even if she didn't, just this if the home becomes that much more of a temple or a place of rest and actually enjoy it, and the animals are invited to be part of that family instead of just working all the time, then it's only going to be a matter of time generationally before people start organizing and putting forth efforts to help protect the animals and make sure that they are living their best lives instead of being abused or neglected and things like that. So this is like turning point for certain for our world is being represented in a lot of ways in this letter. So the second excerpt is more about the parts of the house. Is that what you're?
Yes. Well, he has more attention towards some of their describing physical objects rather than just the people. And we already got a bit of that before. It occurs to me that I should have mentioned. I'd said Naomi and Eliza, the one making supper, are the servants of the family. I don't want to give an impression to any listeners that this is sort of, they might be picturing in their heads maybe like a mansion, like kind of like a big estate. And, so they did have servants, people they paid that helped them with domestic tasks. This is because they were a relatively small family. But also important to know is that Quakers, again, did not believe in hierarchy. So even though they were paying these people to perform certain tasks for them, there was a much more familial relationship that they had
Yeah.
towards them. And I think at least part of that, or at least part of, they're not the same as people might be imagining a butler, is in the excerpt. They did mention that the room is not tidy. The room don't look tighter than normal, for Rowley's blocks are scattered about the floor, and there are plenty of smoking pipes, lying in the windows and on the stoves. So this is a bit of a messy household. So I just want to have people kind of carry that in their mind as well when they hear them talking about like the help.
When he when he talks about the blocks, is that the child's blocks or
Yes, we can, I think, directly connect that to exactly what you're imagining, which are building blocks, sort of another universal, well, we wouldn't call them a pastime, but certainly a universal toy for young children, and just sort of another way that you really do see the sort of sentimental value of what he's describing as well. You know,
okay. So
he said
he
earlier, yeah.
is it a younger brother,
Yes,
the youngest?
yeah, Rowley is, this is actually, I believe, our he's Rowland, so Rowley would have been I think the cousin. He there I should mention if I sound a bit unsure, it's because Rowland was a family name.
Okay.
So there was a Rowland in each generation, sometimes two or three when you look at like who the siblings married and then they had their kids. I believe this is Rowland's nephew. So this
Okay.
is the son, the infant, or rather, very young son of his sister, Anne, who is married and will come up in the letter later with her other child. Yeah, because she has her other child, Agatha, with her as well. So this
So
is Rowling.
it started out as Orchard House in my head, but now it's starting to sound more like Roseanne's house with like toys everywhere. And it's like, again, super relatable. It's like, thanks for having this kid over at this time, because then you added this layer of child culture of the 19th century too being represented, that kids are playing with toys because that's what kids do, especially on, you can't like my son when he was young, we would have quiet time. Like it started as nap time, but after a while he just stopped taking naps because he wasn't tired enough.
Mhm.
But we'd say quiet time, just you spend time in your room, no distractions, nothing like that. But because he was a kid, he'd always end up playing. Like he'd find a toy or many and play with them. And it sounds like the same thing's happening here, where it's like, yeah, this is for the adults. We can handle spending all day just kind of lounging around, but a kid is still want to be busy, and it sounds like he's been busy. But going back to
Right,
the help, one thing that also I think we can just agree on is that this is also employment that they're offering people. We in the modern world, we might kind of like feel weird hiring somebody to clean the house or definitely cook for us if we're middle class people, because we're like, yeah, that's elitism or it's just odd to us but in that era, that was a line of employment, especially for women to make extra money for their own households is to work in somebody
right,
else's. So there's nothing, um, right. It comes across like you could picture like a maid or a butler staff for, the very wealthy, but for people at this level of society, yeah, they do all right for themselves, but they're definitely not big uh, captains of industry types.
right,
So they are, just like you said, part of the family. They get paid for their work and they go back to their families. All right, so let's talk about some of the objects.
right. So this starts the second excerpt just a bit further down as he goes through counting more off more family members and where they are and what they're doing. So begin quote. Aunt Anne is lying down in her room with the telegraph and harmonial man not far off. Anne sits in the east room, the room of all rooms, holding dear little curly-haired Aggie, having great talk with her little woman. That old room holds its own, the bed with its cover spread, Rowley's crib moored alongside, and the chest beneath it, with its normal complement of books and papers and baskets and apples, whole and half eaten, the ink bottle and the snuffer's candlestick and extinguisher on the mantelpiece, the well black stove, the yellow wood box, the striped carpet, another batch of ours playthings on it, all is the same as when last seen by thee. But so all it lacks its chiefest wealth, our dear mother. End quote.
Wow, I love it. It's so illustrative, and it's like
Yeah,
you can just, yeah, I can see it right now. You
Yeah.
know, it's so well done, and it's, yeah, it's only a matter of time before this guy gets published. Um, and you can tell by being in a literary household with his brother reading his book, I'm sure that Rowland has read quite a bit and is learning as all authors do. Like if anybody says like how do you become a writer, it's like, well, you read a lot first. And he's borrowing from, you know, we're talking about an incredible wave of American literature and English literature at that time that he would have access to and learn the do's and don'ts and how to show but not tell, which he's doing in spades here. I mean, this is incredible
Yeah.
show, don't tell. He's not just listing the items, but he's giving nice, you know, just kind of like contextualization to everything. Now, did he say telegraph in there?
Yes. So, and I thought you might pick up on that. I should say telegraph is actually in quotation marks. The Telegraph, the Vermont Telegraph, was an anti-slavery paper written by
Oh,
their good friend Orson S. Murray, I believe. So, and they were, again, if I hadn't said this explicitly before, they were abolitionists, a very strong radical abolitionists. So they would have kept up with all of the latest news. Harmonial Man is a bit trickier. That could be another periodical. It sounds to me more like a book of some kind, or possibly a tract. There are multiple results that come up that it likely could have been in this time, but again, speaks to, as we've been bringing up, this great literacy in the house of, everyone having sort of their own personal um, reading sources. Some are reading newspapers, some are reading what might be the equivalent of sort of self-help books in terms of religious guidance. Or, I mean, we don't know what George is reading in his lazy chair. They just say a book in his hand. It really could have been anything. It could have been
yeah.
a novel of sorts. It could have been, a book on nature. The Robinsons had quite an extensive library. So, I mean, again, the books are just so prominent here.
You'll forgive me if I keep comparing this to movie making or
Go
television
right ahead.
making,
Yeah, that's sort of more
but
your
I think,
wheelhouse as I get it. So, yeah.
yeah, but I mean, it's like when we watch movies that are set in this era or really any time in the 19th century, we don't ever, we usually don't get like one of the messages we usually get from those kinds of things is like you should be glad you live in the modern era because people back then like at any time like a kid could fall sick with some terrible illness and there was no way to save them or you know there was always something tragic happening and you know it was or you didn't have the nice things around the house, but what we're getting here is actually what I would imagine is the more accurate depiction, which is actually something I'm pretty envious of. Like I would love it if we lived in a world where he actually legitimately has silence around him, right? Like there's
Yeah,
you know like if you try, even if you're in the middle of a field in late November, right? And all the you're like, okay, is it silent? No, I can hear a car a mile away,
right.
you know, or like some weird humming sound coming from those wires on the other side of the tree line. Like it's like we don't have silence and we haven't as a society in well over 100 years, but he actually has silence. And when we see like the way that movies are made about that era, they might give us a little shreds of everyday life, but for the most part, it's like, here's something else that's awful about living back then. You know, here's
Right.
something that you didn't think about. But we don't have anything awful here. It sounds like here's some kids' toys, here's reading material, here's, you know, you can smell the sense of food from the kitchen because it's being made, and it's just like a nice, it can almost feel like the warmth of a mid-September afternoon.
Well, I think there's a lot of things to pick out there as well. I would say also, like, you're very right that he doesn't have he doesn't have intrusive noises as we might have today. No one's got the game on just playing in the background. But it isn't total silence because he's also got the sounds of the family. He's got Rowley, the little kid, babbling, in sort of baby talk as he crawls around. He's got the sound of supper getting ready, and it sounds like he must hear the cats reacting. And Anne, I should mention there are two Annes in this letter. Aunt Anne is actually not a family member. That is Anne King, a very close member of, or a very close friend of the family who has lived with them for many years. And Anne is his sister, now grown up with two children of her own, that being Rowley and Aggie, who has clearly been brought. She's also, she lived in Waterloo with her husband, Lloyd. And so the fact that she's at Rokeby at this time means that she is staying with her family. She's clearly brought a lot of things with her. And I just want to point that out because I think that also, again, speaks to this development of sort of the domestic sphere. This is a large family of both blood relations and also close friendships that have come together and have made like what is clearly a very busy household. There's a
Yeah,
lot going on here, but it's to your point, a busyness that does not strike us as anything negative. This is kind of what I mean. We had said this before you had started recording. It being just a week or two after Thanksgiving now, but this is sort of what we only get these days with Thanksgiving, sort of a great gathering of people to your home,
yeah.
this sort of shared rest and relaxation in the modern world, unless you are a member of a very large family yourself. To someone like me, this is something that I really only get at special occasions, sort of a glimpse into
Right.
this world of close family ties, shared experiences, and this just great comfort with each other that you don't have to be constantly entertaining each other. Everyone can kind of be off in their own little room and still be together.
It was a time, 1850s, of remarkable infrastructure growth for the country, and that found its way all the way, I imagine, through Ferrisburg, Vermont. And at the same time, um, the idea of like togetherness and families being pretty much congregating around the same area was still pretty standard. There wasn't a lot of people who were, I'm like staking out west. I'm going to California and see what I could do with the gold there. Uh, that would be the minority of people. As we move forward in time and as our roads get better and our communication gets better, um, people feel more comfortable to go off into new places and stay, make homes for themselves, maybe away from the rest of the family. I know that's true for me. And I always get a little bit, kind of wistful when I am around when I did live in that region, not far from where the Rokeby homestead is, and the farm on the other side of Lake Champlain in New York. My closest relative was like 4 hours away.
Mhm.
Um, but I always got kind of like jealous in a way of my some of my friends who were like, "Oh yeah, I saw grandma this weekend." I'm like, "Oh, where does grandma live?" Like half a mile away from my house. It's like the families still stay pretty much together. And so like Sunday or first day, you would have your family supper, and that was something that continued well into the modern era. Like, you just meet at the house, and that's where you kind of like catch up on things and get ready for the next week. Um, I can sense that here too. So what's the distance from where the daughter lived to their house? Was it something that she would have come over just that day, or do you think she was living
No, no.
there?
I mean, Waterloo, New York would have been a trip of several days.
Oh, New
And I
York.
think,
Okay, yeah,
yeah,
I thought you said water. I thought it's
no.
water something Vermont. Okay, so yeah, Waterloo, New York. Yeah, that is pretty far away. So
Well, and to your point, it is a fact that a lot of people did in the past sort of stay where they were born. That was very typical, but there were also a lot of people who did have to sort of light out and stake a claim, go to where there were jobs, go to where there was property to purchase if they're trying to make a name for themselves. But what you often see in correspondence with this era is this longing to be with the family. Like the family unit uh, is just such a important thing for this period in the 1800s. And again, it lends, I'll keep saying, into that sort of sense of the domestic sphere that really becomes perfected just a few decades on in the sort of like late 1800s. I mean, when I read a letter like this, what just jumps out to me is just like sentiment, like the sentimentality of what he's writing about, to the point that it almost is, you know, um, a cynic might even call it, kind of oozing with sentiment. I mean, the very
Yeah.
last line, he lists all of these possessions, these familiar objects to his mother, and he ends with even with all this that he's described, it lacks its chiefest wealth, the greatest possession, you. Like this is a letter written to written by a man to his mother who is away from home for a time that is clearly unusual for them, and it really does have this deep sense of longing, of not being homesick on his part, but clearly trying to assuage what might be her homesickness, you know, trying to make her feel as closely as he can the family, the presence of the
Hmm.
family, and uh, and their feelings for her.
Did she recover from her illness? Did she
Oh
return to
yes,
the
no, she was
household?
not. It was not serious. It was not a serious illness, but it was simply a sense of being away from the family,
Okay.
which was very important. It was a very important thing for the Robinsons certainly, and for I think most people of the era.
Now, you said that the collection that your museum has is something like 15,000
I believe
letters of
so. Well,
correspondence. So
to give
this
here's
one
a
being
yeah.
saved does not necessarily like make it that they were sentimental about this particular letter. But I guess if you hold on to all that paper, it must mean that the family overall felt it important to hold on to things and not throw anything out.
Well, they were pack rats, and to give you a sense, this letter that I pulled in our archive comes from box 55, folder 11. So that gives you a sense of, and folders can hold anywhere between 5 to maybe 12 letters in them. So just to give you a
Hmm.
sense of the sort of amount I'm talking about here. And yeah, so I don't think there was a motive necessarily for holding on to this. Um, but I don't, but that doesn't mean that it wasn't a source of sentiment to them. I can't say that they would have ever really maybe picked this out to look at, but I sort of jumped past it because it was not one of the excerpts I had read. Um, that being said, he does mention in his letter that he is enclosing a sketch of the house for her, which he says is, quote, in compliance with thy request, which is why I had said um, his mother must be feeling homesick because she has reached out to her son, who again was the artist of the family, and is requesting a physical representation of the home she can't be at. And so I think uh, that does sort of speak to maybe the letter does have specific sentimental value
Yeah.
to the mother. I couldn't tell you where this was in the collection when we first found it. Perhaps it was with the mother's effects.
Maybe she sent another letter that said, "Not good enough. Build me a dollhouse with dolls depicting what everybody's doing right now, so I can see what they're." And he
I'm
delivered on
sure
that one
Rowland
too.
would have. He deeply cared for his mother, and he does actually in this excerpt. Most of it is the one I'm not reading you about the sketch is apologies for certain deficiencies he sees in it. He was an artist; he had an artist's eye, and he says he didn't. He says at one point that I must, I'll quote him. I quote, I must say, in excuse of the want of light and shadows, that the light was so constantly shifting on the day I made the sketch, the sun shining 1 minute and going behind the clouds the next to come forth as soon, that I didn't attempt to do anything at shading. So even here, he's sort of half apologizing because um, he doesn't think it's up to his standards. This drawing he's doing for his mother.
Well, I think that this, like you communicated to me before, this was such a neat, unique, and telling artifact. And while it doesn't stand out as on the surface, it comes across as a very straightforward traditional style primary source. The fact that it has all these elements to it in that it's written in such a different way than usual, I think qualifies it as out of ordinary or non-traditional primary source, which is what I'm all about. So I really appreciate you taking the time. And thank you for taking, on the behalf of everybody that's ever been to your museum, thank you for taking the time. You're a credit to the Rokeby. And where can people who want to visit, first online, but then also in person, how can they best go about doing that?
Well, thank you for your kind words. And yes, if you are interested in learning more about the Rokeby Museum, we are much more than just the story of the Robinson family. We are primarily about the Underground Railroad and the story of abolition. If you want to know more, you can go to our website, Rokeby, that is ROKEBY.org. And if you're interested in coming to the museum itself, we are currently in our off season, but we will be opening up again on May 10th of 2026. And then we will be open every single day from 9 to 5 until, sorry, from 10 to 5 until October 10th of that year. So plenty of time for anybody to stop by. I'd be happy to talk to anybody when they're here. And thank you
And,
again for lending me your ears and letting me talk a bit
and if you
about
go on
a,
September 18th, maybe you guys could get some, first person role players
yeah.
to, on September 18th, portray that entire scene. That would be kind of cool,
Well,
actually.
actually, yeah, if you come on September 18th, what you could do is take the house tour and you could see each of these rooms that he's describing. And you
Yeah.
can sort of visualize the people based on the letter in the rooms themselves.
One of the things that I think is frustrating in a way is, like you said, they were involved in the Underground Railroad. I'm assuming their actual home or their farm itself had, even if there were people who were on the run, he would never have mentioned that in letter. That would have been too risky, correct? To
It's
indicate any
very
like that.
it's very interesting you say that. Actually, the only records we can have them are in the letters. When this wouldn't be Rowland E. Robinson, the one we've been talking about this whole time, it would have been his father, the man falling asleep on the setter, Rowland T. Robinson, the great abolitionist. He wrote quite a few letters to his friends, some of which do discuss um, what we refer to as freedom seekers, self-emancipated men and women who are fleeing from the South to the North. And as for whether or not it was safe to discuss them, one of the things we really stress at Rokeby is just the nuance of it. So in some of these letters, they're very upfront that they have another what they referred to as fugitives that have come their way and they want to get to a safe place or up to Canada. And sometimes they're a little more coy about it. They're using names that appear to be pseudonyms, fake names to protect their identity. Sometimes they're just a little coy about where they're going or where they're staying. It really does depend because when you talk about the story of abolition, you got to remember you were talking about a period of 30 or 40 years in which circumstances were constantly changing drastically
Yeah.
for the enslaved in this country. So, and those are
Well,
things we,
especially 1853, that's the Fugitive Slave Act gets
oh,
enhanced,
yes, yeah.
right? And it extends all the way up to the north.
Yeah, so at
And
this time, they probably would have been a bit, perhaps they would have been a bit more coy about anyone that was
yeah,
crossing their path. Because if you don't know, the Fugitive Slave Act made it an obligation for all Americans to return a freedom seeker to their enslaver or face legal consequences. So, much more motive to be secretive then.
yeah. So I'm curious. I mean, it would be, I don't know how often that they had somebody that they were directly helping on their property, but this letter doesn't even hint at it. So I'm assuming at that time.
Yes, that's a good question. I can't remember what the latest freedom seeker we have in our records is. I do know quite a few of them were from the 30s and 40s, though, so where there was a little bit more leeway.
Hmm.
But yes, I mean that is sort of what we had spoken about before. Those are sort of the much more typical primary source when we talk about research. We talk about, of course, letters, and of course, we're looking for, I said at the beginning, reactions to world events, or in this case, looking for any mention of freedom seekers. And that's why this letter was a bit of a discovery for me, actually, because I had originally looked at it for one piece of information, that it turns out was misattributed to this letter. And then when reading it, I just was like, well, hang on a minute. There's something else here. And I was just sort of amazed at you just kind of keep digging and digging, and you get more and more of a picture of what this family was really like, more than you would in sort of the might be considered the more historically valuable ones, which talk
Yeah.
about business or abolition or the like.
Well, for me, this is the best kind of historical evidence. I love just everyday life type stuff. So, Jonathan All, I thank you so much for joining the Everything's a Primary Source podcast and talking about your wonderful find with us.
Happy to be here. Thanks so much for having me, Eric.
Popular culture, by definition, connects and unites us, and proves that people of different backgrounds, in fact, have a lot in common with one another. I hope you enjoyed this conversation, at least in part, for that reason. If it connects with you and you'd like to add to it, or any of the podcast episodes, just visit everything-history.com and search for the Everything's a Primary Source project, which can be found in the classroom section of the website. We'd love to hear what you have to say. Be sure to rate and share this podcast wherever you are listening to it now, and follow Everything as a Primary Source on social media, including YouTube and especially Instagram. Thank you for listening to the EPS podcast, where everything is a primary source.